Everyone feared the CEO's ex-wife until the new secretary decided to break the rules in front of everyone. Before the story begins, leave a comment with the city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The lobby of Scott Enterprises looked more like a museum than a company entrance. Italian marble, crystal chandeliers, and an atmosphere so serious that even the elevators seemed to whisper. It was exactly the kind of place where Dorrit Starr definitely should not have been wearing a hot pink blazer. But there she was. "Excuse me, miss." Security guard Mike blocked her path with all the subtlety of a rhinoceros. "There seems to be a problem with your dress code." Dorrit looked down, pretending to be completely surprised. "Oh, this? It's pink. P-I-N-K, a color that has existed since forever? Here at Scott Enterprises we have standards." Mike consulted an invisible manual. Black, gray, white, or navy blue. Only. Really? Dorrit laughed, adjusting the strap of her purse. "And where exactly is this rule written? In the Massachusetts Civil Code, or just in your imagination?" On the other side of the lobby, Jessica Sterling watched the scene like a cat ready to strike. At 42, she was everything Dorrit was not. Platinum blonde, dressed in black Chanel, and carrying herself with the authority that screamed, "I used to be married to the owner of this place." "Is there a problem here?" Jessica approached with a poisonous smile. Dorrit turned, and for the first time since arriving in Boston, she felt the true weight of social class differences. "No problem." Dorrit kept her tone steady. "Just discovering that apparently there's a corporate fashion police." Jessica laughed, a sound both crystal clear and completely fake. "Darling, you clearly don't understand how things work here." She circled Dorrit like a predator. "Scott Enterprises has a reputation, tradition, something that people from Jacksonville may not fully grasp." The word Jacksonville rolled off Jessica's tongue as if it were a contagious disease. "Oh, I see." Dorrit nodded, pretending to absorb a valuable lesson. "So the color of my clothing determines my professional competence? What a revolutionary concept. They should be teaching that at Harvard." Some people in the lobby began to pay attention. Soft whispers echoed off the marble walls. "Listen carefully, young lady." Jessica stepped closer. "This is no place for your small-town eccentricities. Here we have standards that people like you simply cannot reach." That was the moment something lit up in Dorrit's eyes. A spark Jessica should have feared. "People like me?" Dorrit repeated slowly. "Do you mean people who work for everything they have? Who weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth? Who believe competence matters more than the color of a jacket?" The lobby fell into complete silence. Even the elevators stopped whispering. "Because let me tell you something, Mrs. Dorrit paused dramatically. "Sterling, isn't it? I didn't come from Jacksonville to Boston to ask for permission. I came here to work, and if a pink blazer offends your delicate sense of style that much, maybe the problem isn't with me." Jessica turned red, a color definitely not included in the company's dress code. "You have no idea who I am." "I have a vague idea." Dorrit smiled sweetly, like poisoned honey. "The CEO's ex-wife who still comes to the office as if she runs the place. It must be comfortable living in the past." The silence in the lobby was now deafening. Employees had stopped pretending they weren't watching. That was when Robert Scott stepped out of the private elevator. At 38, Robert radiated power in a way that made the entire building seem to vibrate on his frequency. Armani suit, perfectly styled hair, and a presence that commanded attention without asking. He was exactly the kind of man Dorrit had always assumed was out of her league. But when his eyes met hers, something inexplicable happened. Maybe it was the defiant way she kept her chin raised. Or how the pink blazer seemed to shout, "I am different, and I will not apologize for it." Or simply the fact that, for the first time in years, someone had faced Jessica Sterling publicly. "Good morning, Jessica." Robert greeted his ex-wife with polite coldness before turning to Dorrit. "And you must be our new financial analyst." "Dorrit Starr." She extended her hand firmly. "And yes, I'm the new analyst who apparently violated the company's unofficial dress code with my criminally pink blazer." Robert almost smiled. Almost. Interesting color. He studied the blazer for a moment. "Different. Thank you?" Dorrit wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a neutral observation. "Jessica, perhaps you could join me in my office?" Robert suggested, though it sounded more like an order. "We need to talk." Jessica gave Dorrit a deadly look before following Robert. But before stepping into the elevator, she turned one last time. "This isn't over, sweetheart." When the elevator closed, Dorrit finally managed to breathe. Only then did she notice her hands were shaking. And in today's episode, she murmured to herself, the main character discovers that Boston is wilder than the swamps of Florida. Mike, the security guard, was still standing there, clearly not knowing what to do. So, he hesitated. "About the blazer?" Dorrit raised one eyebrow at him. "Unless you can show me a federal law that bans the color pink in corporate offices, I'm keeping my blazer. Thank you." Mike sighed, raised his hands in surrender, and walked back to his post completely defeated. As she walked toward the elevators, Dorrit felt every pair of eyes in the lobby stuck on her. Some with curiosity, others with disapproval, but all of them paying attention. That was exactly how she wanted it. Because if there was one thing Dorrit Starr had learned in Jacksonville, it was that sometimes you have to make noise to be heard. And apparently, in Boston, a hot pink blazer was enough to cause a corporate earthquake. "They called me a mistake," she whispered as she stepped into the elevator, "and I'm going to turn that into a plan." The doors closed, but the real battle was only beginning. 3 days after the pink blazer incident, Dorrit was on the 23rd floor of Scott Enterprises, sweating in the most intimidating conference room in Boston. 20 executives in perfect suits stared at her as if she were an animal in a zoo. And she was still wearing pink. "Gentlemen, let me introduce our new financial analyst, Dorrit Starr," Robert announced from the back of the room, his arms crossed. "She has prepared an analysis of the third quarter reports." Dorrit took a deep breath and turned on the projector. The first slide appeared on the huge screen. Mating analysis, Q3 financial reports. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds before muffled laughter spread across the room. "Mating?" The CFO, Mr. Thompson, nearly choked on his coffee. "Are we expecting an analysis of numbers mating with each other?" Well, Jessica Sterling, who had coincidentally shown up at the meeting, smiled like a hungry shark. "At least now we know what kind of analysis she really does." The laughter grew louder. Dorrit felt her face burn. I'm sorry," she stammered, trying to switch the slide. "It was supposed to say marketing analysis, the autocorrect." "Of course, dear." Jessica leaned back in her chair. "Blame the technology. Very professional." Something broke inside Dorrit's chest. All those nights of studying, all the sacrifices to get there, and now she would be remembered as the girl with the ridiculous typo. But then she looked at the numbers on the screen, and something didn't add up. Actually, Dorrit forgot her embarrassment for a moment. "Since we're talking about mating, how about we find out why these numbers seem to be reproducing on their own?" The room went silent again, but this time with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Robert asked, stepping closer. Dorrit clicked to the next slide, her heart pounding like a war drum. "Well, according to the official report, our sales in the technology sector increased 47% in the third quarter." She pointed to the chart. "But when I cross-checked those numbers with the shipping records from the logistics department." New slide. "Shipments actually dropped 12% during the same period." A murmur spread through the room. "So this means—" Thompson leaned forward. "That someone is making up sales," Dorrit finished, feeling a strange confidence rising inside her. "Unless our company has developed the ability to sell products that don't exist." Jessica turned visibly pale. "That's ridiculous." She stood up abruptly. "A junior analyst from Jacksonville questioning reports approved by senior directors? What arrogance." "You're right," Dorrit agreed, surprising everyone. "It is very arrogant of me to question numbers that fail basic math." She clicked to another slide. "Like these contracts here." Dorrit pointed to a list. "Supposedly signed with Tech Vision Corp., you know, the company that went bankrupt 6 months ago." The silence was now deadly. Or these orders from Innovation Plus, which curiously have the exact same digital signature pattern on every document. Another slide. As if one person had signed them all. Thompson stood up, adjusting his glasses. "May I see those original documents?" "Of course." Dorrit handed him a folder. "I also highlighted in yellow all the inconsistencies in the reference codes. Apparently, we sold the same product to 3 different companies on the same day at the same hour with identical serial numbers." The room exploded in whispers. Robert walked up to the table, his eyes fixed on the papers. Jessica tried one last move. Are you really going to listen to an amateur who can't even spell marketing correctly? That's when Dorot had her epiphany. You know what, Jessica? She turned to face the CEO's ex-wife. You're right. I made a typo. Jessica smiled, victorious. But the difference between me and the one who forged these reports, Dorot continued, is that my mistake was honest and visible. Anyone can see it was just carelessness. She gestured at the documents spread out on the table. These mistakes here were deliberate, hidden, calculated to deceive investors and shareholders. The silence in the room was so deep, you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. And frankly, Dorot smiled for the first time since walking in. I'd rather be remembered as the girl who typed mating by accident than as someone who forges financial reports on purpose. Thompson dropped the papers on the table with force. Robert, we need to review all reports from the last 6 months, immediately. I agree. Robert nodded, but his eyes stayed on Dorot. Miss Starr, could you stay? I have some questions about your investigation. Jessica headed for the door but stopped halfway. This isn't over, she whispered, just loud enough for Dorot to hear. And in today's episode, Dorot murmured back, the villain realizes she underestimated the heroine. When the room finally emptied, leaving only Robert and Dorot, he sat in the chair beside her. How did you discover all this? Dorot shrugged, still processing what had just happened. In Jacksonville, my father always said, when something seems too good to be true, it probably is a lie. These numbers were too good. Robert laughed, the first genuinely cheerful sound she had ever heard from him. And the typo? Oh, that was real, Dorot blushed. I was nervous and typed too fast. Autocorrect thought I wanted to talk about animal mating instead of marketing analysis. You know, Robert leaned back, studying her. Maybe that was the best mistake anyone ever made in this company. Why? Because if you had started out perfect, no one would have paid attention to what came next. Dorot felt something strange in her stomach, a mix of relief, pride, and something she couldn't quite identify. So, she hesitated, am I still employed? Robert smiled, a real smile that completely changed his face. Dorot Starr, not only are you still employed, you just saved this company from a massive financial scandal. He stood, straightening his suit, and for the record, he stopped at the door. I loved the blazer today. Pink looks good on you. When he left, Dorot stayed alone in the conference room, staring at the slide still projected on the wall. Mating analysis. She laughed to herself. Outside, Boston rushed on as always, but inside that room, something had changed forever. And it all started with a mistake. That wasn't really a mistake. A week had passed since the mating incident, and Dorot Starr had become the most talked-about person at Scott Enterprises. Half the office treated her like a heroine who saved the company from a financial scandal. The other half whispered that she was a social climber from Jacksonville trying to impress the boss. Jessica Sterling was definitely in the second group. Emergency meeting, main conference room. Robert's assistant appeared at Dorot's desk with a notepad. Now, Dorot looked at the pink blazer that had become her trademark and sighed. Today would just be another normal day in Boston's corporate paradise. Or not. The conference room was packed. Directors, managers, and at the center of it all, Jessica Sterling, holding a bottle of French mineral water as if it were a weapon. Oh, our star has arrived. Jessica smiled far too sweetly. Come, dear, sit right here next to me. Dorot hesitated. In her experience, when predators offered hospitality, it was safer to run. But she sat down anyway. So, Robert began the meeting. Let's review the suspicious contracts Miss Starr uncovered. Dorot opened her folder and spread the documents across the table. Charts, spreadsheets, evidence of fraud organized with military precision. Here we have the contract with Megatech Solutions. She pointed to the first document, supposedly signed on March 15th, but splash! The cold water hit Dorot's pink blazer like an Arctic waterfall. Jessica's bottle had slipped at exactly the right moment. Oh my goodness, Jessica placed a hand on her chest in dramatic surprise. I'm so sorry. How clumsy of me. The whole room went silent. Dorot was soaked, papers dripping water, and her pink blazer clinging to her body like a second skin. Well, Dorot said slowly, looking at her wet clothes. At least it was water, not poison. A few nervous laughs echoed through the room. Jessica stood up with paper towels, pretending to be concerned. Let me help you, dear. Maybe this is a sign you should wear more practical colors? What an interesting coincidence. Dorot stayed seated, dripping water on the marble floor. Your hand slips exactly when I was about to show evidence of fraud. Accidents happen. Jessica shrugged. Especially to people who, how can I put it, don't quite fit in. That was when something lit up in Dorot's eyes. Something dangerous. You know, Jessica, you're right. She stood up, water running down her blazer. Accidents really do happen. Dorot picked up the wet documents and held them high. Like this accident here. She pointed to a smudged signature. The ink is washing away with the water, and look at this. The whole room leaned forward. Under the CEO of Megatech's signature, there's another one. Dorot smiled as if she had just won the lottery, and that handwriting looks very familiar to me. Jessica turned pale. Impossible. Thompson stepped closer. Let me see that. Actually, Dorot continued, feeling a strange rush, the water was a blessing in disguise, because now I can prove that someone forged these signatures using soluble ink. She showed the document to everyone. See? The original signature is here underneath, in regular pen, but someone wrote over it with special ink that washes away with water. The silence in the room was so deep you could hear Jessica's heartbeat racing. Robert stepped closer to the table, his eyes fixed on the document. Jessica? His voice was ice cold. Can you explain why your signature is under the forgery? Jessica stammered for the first time since Dorot had met her. Someone is setting me up. Of course. Dorot nodded, pretending to understand. Someone forged their own signature just so they could forge someone else's on top. What a brilliant plan. The laughter in the room was no longer nervous, it was genuine. Jessica exploded. Listen here, you small-town nobody. She pointed her finger at Dorot. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Jessica, Robert warned, but she kept going. I built this company with Robert. I have connections you can't even imagine, and I won't let some girl from Jacksonville destroy everything I built. The room fell into deadly silence. Nobody breathed. Direct threats now? Dorot stayed calm, though her heart was racing. What an interesting escalation. Robert stepped between them. Jessica, I think you'd better leave, now. No. Jessica turned to him, her eyes blazing with rage. You will choose between me and this? This what? Dorot asked softly. Jessica took a deep breath, clearly trying to control herself, but the venom had already spilled out. This opportunist who showed up out of nowhere with her flashy outfits thinking she can change everything. I see, Dorot nodded. So the problem isn't corporate fraud, it's the fact that I wear pink. The problem, Jessica moved closer, her voice low and threatening, is that you don't know your place. And what is my place? Dorot asked, genuinely curious. Far away from here. The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to press on the air itself. Robert finally spoke. Jessica, you're fired. What? Jessica turned to him, shocked. You don't work here anymore. Robert repeated firmly. Forgery, threats to employees, this ends now. Jessica laughed, a hysterical, unsettling sound. You'll regret this, Robert. And you, she pointed at Dorot, you have no idea what you just started. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frames on the walls shook. When silence returned, everyone turned to Dorot, still dripping water onto the marble floor. Well, she said at last, at least now we know my pink blazer is sabotage-proof. The room burst into laughter. Robert stepped closer to her. Are you all right? Dorot looked at the soaked blazer, the wet documents that had exposed fraud, and the room full of executives who finally respected her. I'm great, she smiled. But I think I'll need some dry clothes. Of course, Robert hesitated. And Dorot? Yes, thank you for everything. As she left the room, leaving wet footprints down the hallway, Dorot murmured to herself. And in today's episode, the heroine discovered that some water reveals more truths than any investigation. But deep down, she knew Jessica Sterling was not the kind of person who accepted defeat. The war was only beginning, and her pink blazer had become the official uniform of the battle. Even drenched, she had never felt more powerful. At 9 o'clock that night, the 23rd floor of Scott Enterprises was quieter than a cemetery. The automatic lights had already gone off, leaving only the emergency lights and the glow from Robert's office still on. Dorot had been there for 3 hours, buried in piles of suspicious contracts. Her pink blazer, now dry, thank heavens, shone like a beacon in the middle of the corporate darkness. Still here? Robert appeared at the door, loosening his tie. Someone has to review these documents before tomorrow's audit. Dorot didn't look up from the papers. And apparently that someone is me. Robert walked into the office, and Dorot felt that strange sensation in her stomach again. It was as if the air grew heavier whenever he was near. "Can I help?" He moved closer to the desk. "2 heads are better than 1. "Sure." Dorot gestured toward the stack of documents. "But I warn you, it's not fun. It's basically looking for a needle in a haystack. Except the needle is more fraud, and the haystack is boring contracts." Robert laughed, that sound that always did strange things to Dorot's heart. "I'll survive." They worked in silence for an hour, sitting side by side, occasionally brushing against each other when reaching for the same document. Each accidental touch sent little electric shocks up Dorot's arm. "I need to get some old files." Robert stood up. "They're in that cabinet over there." He pointed to a vintage wooden file cabinet in the corner of the office. "Problem is, that drawer has been stuck for months. No one can open it." "Let me try." Dorot walked over to the stubborn drawer. "In Jacksonville, my father always said every problem has a solution. You just need the right approach." She pulled the drawer. Nothing. Pulled harder. Still nothing. "Here." Robert moved behind her, placing his hands over hers on the drawer. "Let's try together." Dorot felt the heat of his body behind her, and for a moment, she completely forgot how to breathe. On the count of 3, his voice was dangerously close to her ear. 1, 2, 3. They pulled with all their strength. The drawer suddenly flew open, sending them both tumbling backward into a tangle of arms and legs. Robert tried to steady himself, grabbed Dorot to keep her from falling, but they both ended up on the office floor. Dorot landed on top of him, their faces just inches apart. "Well," she whispered, trying not to look at his lips, "at least the drawer opened." "Yeah." Robert made no move to get up. Mission accomplished. They stayed there, caught in the moment, the outside world fading away, her perfume, his warmth, their uneven breaths. "Dorot," Robert murmured. "Yes? He leaned in closer, and she felt like she might faint or explode. She wasn't sure which. "And in tonight's episode," she whispered nervously, "the drawer has more chemistry than we do." Robert chuckled softly, the sound vibrating between them like a promise. "Maybe we should?" "Should what?" Her eyes met his. "Stop pretending this isn't happening." Dorot's heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. Robert raised his hand, gently touching her face, and she leaned into his touch like a flower reaching for the sun. They were millimeters apart when the office door burst open. "Robert?" Jessica Sterling stood at the doorway, her eyes blazing with murderous fury. Her perfect blonde hair was messy, her makeup smeared, and she held a key in her hand like a weapon. Dora and Robert broke apart instantly. She rolled to the side, and he jumped to his feet. "Jessica?" Robert ran a hand through his hair. "How did you get in here?" "I still have a key." She waved the keyring in the air. "And thank goodness I do, because otherwise I wouldn't have seen this." She gestured at the two of them as if they were a crime against humanity. Dorot stood up, straightening her pink blazer with all the dignity she could gather. "Hello, Jessica. I thought you'd been fired." "Fired?" Jessica laughed like a hyena. "Darling, I built this company. A piece of paper can't destroy me." She moved toward Dorot like a predator cornering its prey. "But you're nothing but an intruder, an opportunist taking advantage of a moment of weakness." "Jessica, stop." Robert stepped between them. "This is none of your business." "None of my business?" Jessica exploded. "Robert, we were married for 8 years. I know you better than anyone." She pointed straight at Dorot. "And do you really think that this small-town girl can give you what I gave you? Can she understand your world, your responsibilities?" Dorot felt as if someone had thrown cold water on her again. But this time, the water was made of raw reality. Jessica was right about one thing. They came from different worlds. "She is an employee, Robert," Jessica continued, relentless. "A subordinate. You are risking everything for what? For a whim? For a novelty?" "Enough," Robert said firmly, but the damage was done. Dorot could feel Jessica's words sinking into her insecurities like poison. Dorot looked at Robert, then at Jessica. "I should go." "Dorot, no." Robert tried to stop her. No, she's right. Dorrit avoided his eyes. This was a mistake, a moment of weakness. The words came out like blades, cutting even herself. We are professional adults. We cannot let this interfere with our work. Jessica smiled in victory. Finally, someone with common sense. Dorrit grabbed her bag and headed for the door, but stopped next to Jessica. But just for the record, she whispered low enough for only Jessica to hear, he wasn't thinking of you when he almost kissed me. Jessica turned red with rage. Dorrit left the office without looking back, but she could feel Robert's eyes burning into her back. In the elevator, alone, she finally allowed the tears to fall. Because Jessica was right, Robert was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She was an analyst from Jacksonville who wore a pink blazer and made jokes about drawers. They didn't make sense. But then why did it hurt so much? They called me a mistake, she whispered to the elevator mirror, and I turned it into a plan. But what if this time the mistake was real? What if she was falling in love with the wrong person, in the wrong place, at the wrong time? The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and Dorrit stepped out into the cold Boston night, carrying the weight of an almost kiss that could have changed everything. Upstairs, on the 23rd floor, Robert was still staring at the open drawer, thinking about how some things, once opened, can never be closed again. And Jessica Sterling smiled, already planning her next move. The war had just turned personal. The following Monday, Dorrit arrived at the office and immediately felt that something was wrong. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Furtive glances followed her down the halls, and there was a mood of gossip in the air that made her hair stand on end. "Good morning, Sarah." Dorrit greeted the receptionist, who looked away awkwardly. Good morning, Miss Starr." Strange. Sarah had always been friendly. In the elevator, two executives were whispering until she stepped in. Then they fell into deadly silence, as if she were contagious. "People on the 10th floor seem excited today," Dorrit commented casually. They didn't respond. When she reached her desk, she found a stack of official memos waiting for her. The first was about inappropriate professional conduct. The second, about workplace relationship policies. The third made her choke, investigation of financial irregularities. "What the hell?" she murmured. "Well, our celebrity has arrived." Marcus from IT walked past her desk with a nasty grin. "I heard you're more creative with numbers than we thought." "What do you mean?" Nothing. He shrugged. "Just rumors about reports, let's say, edited." Dorrit felt her stomach twist. "Marcus, I never." "Of course not." He winked. "Just like you never tried to seduce the boss for a promotion, right?" Dorrit's blood ran cold. "What did you say?" But Marcus had already walked away, leaving behind a trail of malicious laughter. All morning, the situation grew worse. Accusing stares, whispered comments, complete isolation. It was as if she carried a contagious disease called corporate scandal. By lunchtime, Dorrit was ready to explode. And in today's episode, she muttered to herself as she walked toward the cafeteria, the protagonist learns that gossip travels faster than the truth. That was when she saw Jessica Sterling sitting at a corner table, surrounded by 3 senior managers, whispering intensely. Everything made sense. Dorrit took a deep breath, remembering to keep her language professional, that very unpleasant person. By the afternoon, the situation officially blew up. "Miss Starr, please report to the main conference room." The HR assistant appeared at her desk with a funeral expression. Immediately, the room was full. Directors, managers, HR staff, and at the center of it all, Jessica Sterling, with the smile of a cat that had just eaten the canary. "Miss Starr." HR Director Mr. Four Williams gestured to a lone chair in the middle of the room. "Please have a seat." Dorrit sat down, feeling like a defendant in a courtroom. "We've received serious accusations regarding your professional conduct." Williams opened a folder, specifically about manipulating financial data and using improper influence to gain benefits. "What influence?" Dorrit asked, genuinely confused. Jessica leaned forward. "Dear, we all know about your special relationship with certain people in positions of authority." "Special relationship?" Dorrit repeated. "You mean staying late to review fraudulent contracts? What kind of special relationship do you call that?" "The kind that involves being alone in the CEO's office late at night." Jessica smiled venomously. "Very dedicated to your work." Whispers rippled through the room. Williams cleared his throat. In addition, we have evidence that you altered documents to make your colleagues look incompetent. What evidence? Durant stood up. I saved this company from real fraud. Jessica opened a folder and spread papers across the table. These reports show discrepancies between the numbers you presented and the original system files. Durant looked at the documents and felt the floor fall out from under her feet. The numbers were different. Completely different. This isn't right. She grabbed the papers. These are not the documents I analyzed. Of course not, Jessica laughed, because you altered them. I didn't alter anything. Durant exploded, finally losing her composure. Someone changed these numbers afterward. Evidence? Williams asked coldly. Durant looked around the room, seeing only skeptical, hostile faces. I can prove it. The system must have backups of the original files. We've already checked, Jessica said calmly. The backups confirm the numbers here. Your reports were creative. Durant felt the world spinning. Someone had hacked the system, changed everything, and she had no way to prove it. Furthermore, Jessica continued, savoring every word, we have witnesses that you admitted to turning mistakes into plans, your own words. The phrase Dorot had used as her mantra was now being used against her. That was taken out of context, she protested. I was talking about overcoming challenges, or about covering up fraud. Jessica shrugged. The room was deadly silent. Durant could feel her reputation being destroyed in real time. Miss Starr, Williams began, given the seriousness of these accusations. One moment. The voice cut through the room like a blade. Robert Scott was standing at the door, his face as serious as stone. Robert? Jessica stood, feigning surprise. I didn't know you would be here. Clearly. He walked into the room, his eyes fixed on Jessica. May I ask what's going on? Just resolving some irregularities. Jessica smiled sweetly. Nothing you should worry about. Robert approached the table and picked up the documents. Interesting, he studied the papers. These reports are dated Friday at 11 p.m. Yes, Williams nodded. And on Friday at 11 p.m. Robert looked directly at Jessica. Our system was undergoing scheduled maintenance. No one could access the files. The silence in the room became deafening. Furthermore, Robert continued, I have the security recordings showing that only 3 people were in the building that night. He paused dramatically. Me, Miss Starr, and you, Jessica. Jessica turned visibly pale, and since Miss Starr was with me reviewing contracts until midnight. Robert smiled coldly. Would you like to explain how she could have altered files in an offline system? The bomb went off in the room. Whispers, shocked looks, Jessica trying to form words that wouldn't come. This is, Jessica stammered. This is attempted sabotage and defamation. Robert finished. And this time, Jessica, you went too far. Dorot felt tears of relief burning her eyes. And in today's episode, she whispered, the villain forgot to match her story. Williams closed the folder, embarrassed. Well, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Robert said firmly. It was deliberate sabotage, and I want a full investigation. Jessica stood abruptly. This isn't over. She glared at Dorot with pure hatred. You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. She stormed out, slamming the door. When everyone dispersed, Robert walked over to Dorot. Are you all right? Dorot looked at him, still processing everything. Why did you defend me? Robert hesitated. Because it was the right thing to do. Is that all? He held her gaze for a long moment. No, it wasn't just that. And for the first time since the jam drawer, Dorot felt that maybe, just maybe, they could be on the same side of the war. They called me a mistake, she whispered, and I turned it into a plan. What a plan? Robert smiled. Jessica won't know what hit her. But Dorot knew Jessica Sterling wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily. The war was only heating up. 3 days after Jessica's exposure, Dorot thought things would get better. She was wrong. If before there had been whispers, now there was open hostility. Her colleagues treated her as if she were a bomb about to explode, avoiding any contact that might link them to the scandal of the analyst who almost destroyed the CEO's ex-wife. Good morning, Jennifer. Dorot tried to greet the colleague at the next desk. Jennifer pretended not to hear, burying her face in the computer screen. Hi, everyone. Dorot waved at the group chatting near the printer. They scattered like frightened pigeons. Great. she sighed, adjusting the pink blazer that had become more of a symbol of resistance than a piece of clothing. And in today's episode, the main character becomes persona non grata in her own workplace. The situation got worse during the morning meeting. Mr. Thompson was presenting the quarterly results when he mentioned certain irregularities that were clarified recently. All heads turned to Dorot. Fortunately, Thompson continued, we managed to resolve the situation before it caused greater damage to the company's reputation. Greater damage? Dorot had saved the company. Excuse me, she raised her hand, but the irregularities I found saved millions in. Thank you, Miss Starr. Thompson cut her off, but I think it's best to keep our focus on the future. The message was clear. She was a problem everyone wanted to forget. At lunch, Dorot sat alone in the cafeteria, watching groups of colleagues laugh and talk while avoiding her as if she carried a contagious disease. May I sit? Dorot looked up and saw Maria, the morning shift cleaning lady. Of course. Dorot smiled, grateful for any human company. Listen, Maria leaned in, whispering, I clean the offices at night, right? And I overheard some conversations. What kind of conversations? About you, about how certain people are, let's say, influencing opinions. Dora frowned. Jessica? I can't say names, Maria looked around nervously, but let's just say a very well-dressed blonde has been making late-night visits to the building, talking to important people. Dorot's stomach dropped. She's sabotaging my reputation. Dear, Maria touched her hand, in 30 years of cleaning offices, I've learned one thing. The truth always comes out. But sometimes it takes time. And what if I don't have time to wait? Maria sighed. Then you need to decide what matters more, your dignity or your job. That afternoon, the final straw came during a presentation Dorot had prepared for weeks. She was explaining a new analysis strategy when Mr. Peterson, the operations director, interrupted her. Sorry, Miss Starr, but I think it would be better if someone else presented this information. What do you mean? Dorot blinked, confused. Well, considering the recent circumstances, maybe it's more appropriate for someone with more experience to represent the company. Experience, as if she were an old suitcase full of problems. Mr. Peterson, I developed this entire analysis. I know every number, every variable. And I'm sure Marcus can present it properly. Marcus gave a false smile and stood up to take her place. Dorot felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't just humiliation. It was the painful realization that no matter how many frauds she uncovered, how many reports she saved, or how competent she was, she would always be the girl from the scandal. Thank you, she said calmly, but that won't be necessary. Dorot gathered her papers and left the room, ignoring the curious stares. In the hallway, she stopped in front of the ladies' room and looked at herself in the mirror. The pink blazer that once represented courage now looked like nothing more than naivety. And in today's episode, she whispered to her reflection, the main character walks away from the drama. Dorot returned to her desk, turned on her computer, and began typing. Dear Mr. Williams, through this letter, I hereby submit my resignation from the position of financial analyst at Scott Enterprises, effective immediately. Her hands were trembling as she typed, but she kept going. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to work at such a prestigious company, and I hope the projects I began will continue to benefit the organization. Sincerely, Dorot Starr. She printed the letter, signed it with a blue pen because apparently pink was not appropriate for official documents, and headed to the main lobby. The lobby of Scott Enterprises was as busy as always. Important executives crossed the Italian marble, corporate tourists admired the crystal chandeliers, and life went on as usual. Dorot stood right in the center of the hall, took a deep breath, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Excuse me, I'd like to make an announcement. The conversation stopped. Heads turned. The entire lobby focused on her. My name is Dorot Starr, and I'm resigning from Scott Enterprises. Whispers spread through the crowd. I want everyone to know that it was an honor to work here, even if only for a short time. She held the letter up high. And for those who are curious, yes, I wear a pink blazer. No, that doesn't make me less competent, and no, I don't regret a thing. From the 23rd floor, through the glass wall, Jessica Sterling watched the scene with a triumphant smile. Victory, she murmured to herself. But at that moment, Robert Scott came running down the emergency stairs, having abandoned the elevator because it was too slow. Dorot! He reached the hall out of breath. What are you doing? Resigning. She held out the letter, officially. Why? Dorot looked around the lobby, at all the people watching the drama unfold as if it were a reality show episode. Because, she said softly, I can't work in a place where being myself is considered a problem. You can't leave. Why not? Robert opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words he wanted to say seemed stuck somewhere between his heart and his reason. Because you're valuable to this company. Am I? Dorot laughed without humor. Then why do I feel like a virus everyone wants to eliminate? Robert looked around, seeing the curious stares, the phones recording, the situation turning into a public spectacle. Can we talk in my office? No. Dorot shook her head. We've talked enough. It's time for me to go back where I belong. And where is that? Jacksonville. She smiled sadly. Where pink blazers are just pink blazers and mistakes are just mistakes. Dorot turned to leave but stopped. Robert? Yes? Thank you. For defending me, for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And then she did something that surprised even herself. She stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek lightly. They called me a mistake, she whispered for him alone to hear. And I turned it into a plan. But some plans just don't work. Dorot walked across the lobby, her heels echoing on the marble like a farewell march. The glass doors opened automatically, as if even the building wanted to get rid of her. Outside, Boston carried on with its busy life, indifferent to the personal drama of a girl from Jacksonville who dared to dream big. But for the first time since arriving in the city, Dorot felt something close to relief. Maybe going home wasn't giving up. Maybe it was just starting over. In the lobby, Robert still stood where she had left him, holding a resignation letter and realizing, too late, that some things are too valuable to lose. And on the 23rd floor, Jessica Sterling celebrated a victory she didn't know would be her last. 2 weeks later, Dorot was sitting at the Sunshine Cafe, the same place where she used to drink chocolate milkshakes as a teenager. Jacksonville seemed smaller than she remembered, but also more welcoming, like a warm hug after months in Boston's corporate ice. So, Tommy Martinez, her best friend since high school, stirred his coffee with a spoon far too small for his huge hands. You left the dream job to come back here? Girl, did you hit your head? It wasn't exactly the dream job. Dorot bit into the grilled cheese sandwich, the same one she had ordered for 15 years. It was more like a nightmare with a good paycheck. And the guy? The billionaire CEO? Sarah Chen, her other best friend, leaned forward with sparkling eyes. Tell us everything. Was he handsome? Sarah, Dorot almost choked on her soda. What? I'm a journalist. I need the juicy details for the story. What story? Local girl conquers Boston and comes home victorious. Sarah made a dramatic gesture. It'll be front page of the Jacksonville Tribune. I didn't conquer anything. Dorot laughed. I literally ran away with my tail between my legs. You uncovered fraud in a billion-dollar company, Tommy pointed out, stood up to the boss's ex-wife, and walked out with your head held high. If that's not victory, I don't know what is. Dorot looked out the cafe window, watching the calm life of Jacksonville pass slowly by. No rush, no pressure, no pink blazers starting revolutions. You know what? She turned to her friends. I'm thinking of starting my own company. Doing what? Sarah asked. Financial consulting, but with complete transparency. No politics, no manipulation, no, she paused, no psychopathic ex-wives trying to destroy innocent people. Tommy laughed. And what would the name be? Star Consulting? I was thinking of something more playful. Dorot smiled mischievously. And in tonight's episode, the protagonist considers calling the project Blazer Co. Sarah almost spat out her coffee. You cannot name a company Blazer Co. Why not? It's memorable, it's unique, and it represents everything I've learned. Be yourself, even when the whole world thinks you're wrong. That is, Tommy stopped to think, actually brilliant. Right? Dorot lit up for the first time in weeks. Imagine the slogan, Blazer Co., where being different is our specialty. The three of them laughed until they cried. Meanwhile, 1,500 kilometers away, Robert Scott was having the worst month of his professional life. Shares dropped 12% this week. CFO Thompson placed the reports on the table with the delicacy of someone announcing a death. Investors are nervous about recent events. Robert looked out the window of his office on the 23rd floor. From there, he could see the exact spot where Dorot had resigned 2 weeks earlier. Recent events, he repeated. You mean the discovery of massive fraud that could have destroyed the company? Well, yes, but also the negative publicity about dismissed employees and, let's say, personal drama. Robert turned to face Thompson. Personal drama? Robert. Peterson entered the room without knocking, followed by 3 other board members. We need to talk. About what? About leadership. About focus. About the fact that you're letting personal matters interfere with business. Robert felt anger boil inside. Personal matters? Like defending a competent employee from sabotage? Like getting romantically involved with a subordinate, Peterson corrected, causing a public scandal that's hurting our reputation. I did not get involved with anyone, but you wanted to. Jessica Sterling's sharp voice echoed through the room. She walked in as if she still owned the place, and everyone saw it. Robert clenched his fists. Jessica, you don't work here anymore. No, but I'm still a shareholder, and as a shareholder, I'm concerned about the direction this company is taking. She stepped closer to the table, full of poisonous confidence. Robert, dear, you were always focused, determined, but since that girl showed up, you've lost your way. I found out my own ex-wife was stealing from the company, Robert said slowly, and you think I'm the one who lost my way? You chose her instead of protecting your position. Jessica smiled coldly. And now you're paying the price. Peterson cleared his throat. Robert, the board has decided it may be time for you to take some time, reconsider your priorities. You're pushing me out? We're suggesting a leave of absence, voluntary. Peterson couldn't meet his eyes, until things calmed down. Robert looked around the room, at the men he had considered partners, at the woman he once loved, at the empire he had built brick by brick. And if I refuse, then we'll have to vote. Peterson sighed. And frankly, Robert, you don't have the votes. The silence in the room was suffocating. Robert walked to the window, staring at the city he knew better than anyone. Boston was his kingdom. Scott Enterprises was his legacy. But for the first time in his life, none of it seemed important. How long? He asked without turning. 3 months, maybe 6. Robert nodded slowly. I want it on record that this is the biggest mistake you've ever made. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. And Jessica? Yes? Congratulations, you finally got what you wanted. That night, Robert was in his empty apartment. Jessica had taken half the furniture in the divorce, sipping whiskey and staring at the business card Dorot had left on his desk. Star, financial analyst. Underneath, scribbled by hand, they called me a mistake, and I turned it into a plan. Robert smiled for the first time in weeks. He picked up the phone, hesitated, and dialed. Hello? Her voice still did strange things to his heart. Dorot? It's Robert. Silence on the other end. Hi. Her voice was cautious. How did you get my number? HR. Listen, I know you don't want to talk to me, but Robert, if you're calling to offer me my job back, the answer is no. It's not that. He took a deep breath. Actually, I'm also, let's say, between jobs at the moment. What do you mean? The board pushed me out. Apparently, defending you was a strategic mistake. Another silence. Robert, I'm sorry. Don't be. It was the best thing that's happened to me in years. What do you mean? Robert looked out the window, watching Boston shine in the darkness. Because it made me realize that some things are more important than corporate empires. Like what? He hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. Like the girl in the pink blazer who made jokes about drawers and turned mistakes into plans. On the other end of the line in Jacksonville, Dorot felt her heart race. Robert, I know it's complicated. I know we're from different worlds, but Dorot, yes, I miss you. Tears burned her eyes. I miss you too. They stayed silent, 2 people 1,500 kilometers apart, feeling the same pain. And in today's episode, Dorot whispered, 2 hearts discover that distance doesn't heal certain wounds. Heal? Robert laughed sadly. No, she admitted. It just makes everything harder. When they hung up, both stared into emptiness, knowing that some connections transcend geography, and that some love stories begin when everything else falls apart. 3 weeks later, Dorot was in her mother's backyard, painting a handmade sign that read Blazer Co. consulting with attitude when she heard a car pull up in front. "Mom," she shouted inside. "Did you order delivery?" "No, dear." Dorot wiped her hands on her jeans, a freedom she never had in Boston, and walked to the front of the house. A black BMW was parked on the street, completely out of place in the neighborhood of small houses and wooden fences. And stepping out of the car was Robert Scott. "You've got to be kidding me," Dorot murmured, frozen. Robert looked different. No suit, wearing jeans and a simple blue shirt. His hair slightly messy, and a bit of stubble on his face that made him seem more human, less like an untouchable billionaire CEO. "Hi." He approached slowly, as if not wanting to scare off a wild animal. "Robert?" Dorot blinked, still not believing it. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you." "You flew from Boston to Jacksonville just to talk?" "Actually, I drove." He gestured toward the car. 19 hours. Stopped 3 times for directions and once for coffee. That was terrible. Dorot couldn't help but smile. And in today's episode, the billionaire crosses the country for a girl in a pink blazer. Ex-billionaire, Robert corrected with a sad smile. "Technically." "Oh," Dorot shifted uncomfortably. "Sorry, I heard that. Well, that I was kicked out of my own company?" Robert laughed without humor. "Yeah, news travels fast." They stood on the sidewalk, the physical distance small, but the emotional distance feeling like an ocean. "Why did you come?" Dorot asked softly. Robert took a deep breath, like someone preparing to jump off a cliff. "Because for 3 weeks I've been waking up thinking of you, and going to sleep thinking of you. And all day long, when I should be planning my revenge against Jessica or strategizing how to get my company back, I keep thinking about pink blazers and jokes about drawers." Dorot felt her heart race. "Robert, I'm in love with you." The words came out like a confession. Madly, completely, hopelessly in love. The world seemed to stop. Birds stopped singing, the wind stopped blowing, even the curious neighbors stopped pretending they weren't peeking through their windows. "You can't say that," Dorot whispered. "Why not?" "Because," she gestured desperately, "because you lost everything because of me. Your company, your position, your whole life. So I cannot be the reason you threw everything away." Her outburst echoed through the quiet street. Some neighbors didn't even bother pretending they weren't listening anymore. Robert stepped closer. "Dorot, I didn't throw anything away. I chose. There's a difference." "There isn't." Tears started forming in her eyes. "You had an empire. You had power, influence, everything you built over years. And now I have the chance to build something new. Something real." "With what? With who?" Dorot laughed bitterly. "With me? The girl from Jacksonville who wears pink blazers and makes nervous jokes? Especially with you." Robert reached out his hand, but she pulled back. "You don't understand." Dorot shook her head. "I cannot be the woman Robert Scott gave up everything for. I can't carry that weight." "What weight?" "The weight of being your downfall." She exploded again. "Of being the reason you lost everything that mattered." "You think Scott Enterprises was everything that mattered to me?" "It was your life." "It was my prison," Robert said calmly, "and you set me free." Dorot stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Dorot, I spent 15 years building a company, married to a woman who saw me as a trophy, surrounded by people who agreed with me out of fear or self-interest." He smiled sadly. "You were the first person in years who challenged me, who made me laugh, who made me remember who I was before I became a corporate brand." But nothing." Robert stepped closer. "Losing the company showed me I had other priorities. You showed me what they were." Dorot felt the tears finally escape. "This is crazy, Robert. We're from different worlds. You're sophisticated. I make jokes about mating marketing. You have an MBA from Harvard. I have a degree from a state university nobody knows." And you'll regret it," she whispered. "A year from now, 2 years from now, you'll look at me and think, what did I trade my empire for?" Robert laughed, the sound she missed most in the world. "Do you know what my first thought was when I woke up today? What? Does she still wear that pink blazer? And my second thought was, how can I make her smile today?" Dorot sobbed. "That's not enough." "Why not?" "Because," she searched for reasons, for logic, for anything that explained the fear she felt, "because I need to build my own life, my own company, prove that I can succeed on my own." Robert nodded slowly. "I understand." "You do? You need to know you're strong enough not to need me." Durant looked at him, surprised by his understanding. Exactly. And I need to prove I can build something new. Something worth it. Yes. They stood in silence, two people who loved each other but couldn't be together. So? Robert sighed. I should go. You should. But neither of them moved. Robert? Yes? The final board vote is next week, isn't it? To decide if you return or if they remove you for good? Yes, Thursday at 3 in the afternoon, he frowned. Why? Durant hesitated, then let it slip. Just curious. Robert studied her for a long moment. Durant, you should go. She turned toward the house. You have a long drive ahead. Wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. If things were different, if there wasn't all this mess, would you? Yes, she answered without hesitation. In any universe, in any situation, in any life, yes. Robert closed his eyes as if to carve the moment into memory. That will have to be enough. Durant heard the car door close, the engine start, the sound fading down the street. Only then did she turn, seeing nothing but the taillights disappearing at the corner. Her mother appeared on the porch. Was that him? It was. You sent him away? I did. Why? Durant looked at the still wet sign for Blazer Co. Because I need to know who I am when I'm not in love. But that night, alone in her childhood bedroom, Durant opened her laptop and searched for flights to Boston. Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. Maybe it was time to find out if some battles are worth fighting, even when you're not sure you can win. They called me a mistake, she whispered into the darkness, and I'm going to turn that into a plan. But this time the plan included a pink blazer and a one-way ticket to Boston. Thursday, 2:50 p.m. The Scott Enterprises boardroom was tense as a violin string ready to snap. 15 board members, 3 business journalists, because leaks always happen. And at the center of it all, Jessica Sterling, in a Chanel suit that cost more than a car. Robert was seated at the end of the table, looking oddly calm for someone about to lose everything he had built. Gentlemen, Peterson tapped the makeshift gavel, we are here to decide the future leadership of Scott Enterprises. Jessica leaned forward, her red nails drumming on the mahogany table. Before we begin, she said in a voice sweet as poison, I'd like to present additional evidence regarding the instability of our current CEO. Robert raised an eyebrow. Additional evidence? Yes. Jessica opened an elegant folder. Phone records showing excessive calls to Jacksonville, employee reports of erratic behavior, and, she paused dramatically, witnesses that you drove 19 hours to chase after a former employee who was clearly manipulating you. Whispers swept through the room. Chase after? Robert laughed. Is that what you call a civilized conversation now? Robert? Thompson sighed. We understand you've been through a difficult time, but... A difficult time? Jessica interrupted. Gentlemen, this man abandoned his responsibilities for a romantic fantasy with a woman who almost destroyed our company. She saved our company, Robert exploded. She caused the biggest scandal we've ever had. Jessica shot back. At that moment, the double doors of the hall swung open, and Durant Starr walked in as if she owned the place. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights. She was wearing the pink blazer. Of course she was. But this time it looked different. More confident. More determined. As if she finally knew exactly who she was. Sorry for the interruption, Durant said calmly, but I heard you were discussing my work without inviting me. How rude. Jessica went livid. What are you doing here? Exercising my American right to defend myself. Durant smiled sweetly. You know, that little thing called the First Amendment? Robert stared at her as if she were an apparition. Durant, how did you? Flight from Jacksonville to Boston, 2 hours and 40 minutes. She sat in the empty chair next to him. Economy, window seat, snack included. Very civilized. Peterson cleared his throat. Miss Starr, with all due respect, this is a private board meeting. About me. Durant cut him off. So it's not that private, is it? She turned to Jessica with a smile that could make a shark jealous. Besides, I have some interesting things to share about corporate fraud and evidence tampering. Jessica laughed nervously. Dear, you've already been fired. Your accusations have no legal standing. You're right, Durant nodded, but they do have journalistic standing. She waved toward the door where 2 Wall Street Journal reporters walked in with cameras. Hope you don't mind. I thought the American public should know the truth about questionable corporate practices. Jessica jumped to her feet. This is an ambush. This is transparency, Dorot corrected her. Something that seems to be a strange concept around here. You can't film here, Peterson protested. Actually, one of the reporters said, Miss Starr provided us with evidence of corporate crimes. We have the right to investigate. Dorot opened her own folder, far less elegant than Jessica's, but infinitely more organized. Gentlemen, she began, I'd like to present something interesting. Original documents from the computers of Scott Enterprises, recovered by a tech specialist from Jacksonville. Tommy appeared at the door, waving cheerfully. Hi everyone, I'm a data recovery specialist, and I found some very interesting things. Jessica was starting to look visibly nervous. This is invasion of privacy. Actually, Dorot smiled, it's an investigation of criminal activity, completely legal when there's suspicion of fraud. She spread documents across the table. These are the real records of file changes, showing exactly when the data was modified, by which computer, and… Dorot paused for dramatic effect worthy of a movie. By which user? The color drained from Jessica's face. Interesting, Dorot continued, because according to these files, all the changes that incriminated me were made from one specific computer. A computer that, according to security logs, was accessed by only one person in the company. She looked directly at Jessica. Someone who still had an access card even after being fired. This is, Jessica stammered. This is evidence of corporate sabotage, the reporter finished, filming everything. Robert rose slowly. Jessica, did you falsify evidence against Dorot? I was protecting the company. Protecting? Dorot exploded. You were framing me to save your own skin. And in today's episode, she continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm, the villain forgot to match her version of the story. The room erupted in simultaneous conversations. Peterson banged his gavel, trying to restore order. The journalists shouted questions, and Jessica tried to slip out quietly. Not so fast. Dorot stopped her. We still have the best part. She signaled to Tommy, who opened a laptop. Folks, you're gonna love this. An audio recording of a very interesting conversation. Jessica's voice filled the room. I don't care about evidence. I want that girl destroyed. Change the numbers, make up whatever it takes, but get her out of the way. Dead silence. Oops, Dorot said cheerfully. Looks like someone forgot their taps on company phones. Jessica looked as if she'd seen a ghost. That was taken out of context. What context? The reporter asked. The context where you admit to falsifying evidence? Peterson stood up, visibly shaken. Jessica Sterling, you are formally accused of corporate sabotage, document forgery, and… Enough, Jessica exploded. You think some random girl from Jacksonville can destroy everything I built? She pointed at Dorot with pure hatred. She ruined my wedding. She ruined my reputation. She ruined my life. I ruined it? Dorot stood up, incredulous. Jessica, you forged documents. You lied to investors. You tried to frame me for crimes you committed. Because you were never supposed to be here, Jessica shouted. This is not your world. Your ridiculous clothes, your stupid jokes, your mediocre background, you don't belong here. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt solid. Dorot looked around the room, at the shocked faces, the cameras recording, at Robert staring at her with something close to admiration. You know, Jessica, she said calmly, you're right. I don't belong in this world. Pause. I belong in a better world. The room erupted in applause. Robert stepped closer to Dorot, his eyes shining. How did you pull all of this off? Tommy's a hacker in his free time, she smiled, and I learned that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. And now? Dorot looked at Jessica being escorted out by security, at the reporters finishing their stories, at the chaos she had caused. Now, she said, I think we have a company to rebuild. Robert smiled, the first genuine smile in months. We? Well, Dorot adjusted her pink blazer, someone has to teach you about transparency, and apparently that someone wears a pink blazer and makes jokes about drawers. They called me a mistake, she whispered just for him. And you turned it into a revolution, Robert finished. Outside, Boston watched the biggest corporate scandal of the year. But inside the room, two people finally understood that some battles are worth any war, and that sometimes a happy ending begins exactly when everything seems lost. 2 hours after Jessica's exposure, the boardroom looked like a battlefield after war. Papers were scattered, coffee cups abandoned, and the air was so tense you could cut it with a knife. So, Peterson cleared his throat, clearly uneasy. Considering the recent developments, perhaps we should reconsider the leadership situation. Robert was seated next to Dorrit, who still radiated the energy of someone who had just torn down an empire of lies using nothing but the truth and a pink blazer. "What exactly do you mean?" Robert asked. "Well," Thompson shuffled his papers nervously. "Obviously you were wronged by Jessica's accusations. Maybe we can just forget this whole situation and return to business as usual." Dorrit let out a laugh that echoed through the room. "Forget? You nearly destroyed his reputation based on lies, and now you want to forget?" "Miss Starr," Williams tried a condescending tone. "We understand your indignation, but business is business." "Business is business?" Dorrit stood up. "You sabotaged an honest man to protect a criminal, and now you want to pretend nothing happened?" Robert placed a hand on her arm. "Dorrit, it's all right." "It is not all right." She turned to him. "Robert, they betrayed you. They humiliated you, and now they expect you to come back as if it's some kind of favor? It's complicated." Robert began. "It's not complicated," Dorrit burst out. "It's a matter of dignity." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "Perhaps," Peterson suggested cautiously, "we should discuss the terms of Robert's reinstatement as CEO." "Terms?" Dorrit laughed bitterly. "How generous. You'll allow him to return to the company he built." At that moment, the doors opened, and 3 reporters rushed in. "Mr. Scott! Mr. Scott!" A CNN journalist pushed a microphone forward. "Can you comment on the arrest of Jessica Sterling just minutes ago?" Robert blinked, stunned. "Arrest? Yes. The FBI just took her into custody for corporate fraud and sabotage. What's your reaction?" The boardroom fell into absolute silence. Robert looked at Dorrit, who was just as shocked as he was. "I didn't know." "Mr. Scott," another reporter stepped forward, "rumors say you will immediately reassume control of the company. Is that true?" Peterson quickly stood up. "There are no official comments at this moment." Actually, Robert rose to his feet, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I do have a comment." All cameras turned to him. "I, Robert Scott, am formally resigning as CEO of Scott Enterprises." The boardroom exploded. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and board members jumped to their feet in panic. "Robert," Peterson yelled over the noise. "You can't." "I can, and I am," Robert said calmly, but his voice carried across the room. "This company has shown that it prefers politics over principles, lies over truth, and convenience over integrity." "But Robert," Thompson pleaded, "this is your company." "No." Robert shook his head. "This is a company that betrayed its own values, and I refuse to lead an organization that cannot recognize the difference between right and wrong." Dorrit stared at him, completely shocked. "Robert, no, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He turned to her, and something in his eyes made her heart stop. "Because some things are more important than empires." "Like what?" a reporter shouted. Robert looked directly at the cameras. "Like working with people you respect. Like building something based on honesty. Like—" He hesitated, then looked at Dorrit. "Like not losing the person who makes you want to be better." And in today's episode, Dorrit whispered, tears forming in her eyes, the CEO resigns in the middle of the corporate breakfast. But Robert wasn't finished. "And since we're being transparent," he continued, still speaking to the cameras, "I want it on record that Dorrit Starr is the most competent analyst I've ever met. She saved this company from a scandal that could have cost millions, and in return she was sabotaged, slandered, and forced to resign." Peterson was in total panic. "Robert, please, let's talk in private." "No." Robert was relentless. "You had your chance to talk. You chose to believe convenient lies instead of inconvenient truths." He turned to Dorrit. "And you? You had the courage to come back here and fight for the truth, even when it meant facing powerful people. Even when it meant risking your own safety." "Robert," she whispered. "So yes," he said to the cameras, "I am resigning. And if any smart company wants to hire the best financial analyst in the country, she's available." He pointed at Dorrit, who was as red as a tomato. "And she wears a pink blazer. Deal with it." The hall exploded with laughter from the reporters and total panic from the board members. "But what about the company?" Williams shouted desperately. "And the shareholders and the employees?" Robert stopped at the door. "The company will be fine. It has good employees, and apparently it's about to get rid of toxic leadership." He smiled ironically. Consider this a management reorganization. You can't just walk away. Peterson ran after him. I can, and I will. Robert took Durrat's hand, and I'm taking with me the only person in this room who truly understands what integrity means. Durrat followed him, still in shock. Robert, are you out of your mind? You just threw away billions of dollars. No. He stopped in the hallway, far from the cameras and chaos. I just invested in the only thing that really matters. What's that? A future with you. Tears finally escaped her eyes. But your company, your life, everything you built. Durrat. He held her face in his hands. I built an empty empire. You showed me how to build something real. And what if it goes wrong? What if you regret it? Robert smiled. That smile that made her heart do somersaults. Then at least we'll go wrong together. From the hall behind them, shouts of panic and camera flashes still echoed. And now? Durrat asked. Now, Robert pulled her closer. How about we start that company you were planning? Blazer Co., wasn't it? Durrat laughed through her tears. You remember? I remember everything you told me. They left Scott Enterprises for the last time as former employees, but for the first time as true partners. Outside, Boston buzzed with the headlines. CEO resigns for love. Corporate empire collapses. The girl in the pink blazer who changed everything. But Durrat and Robert hardly noticed. Because sometimes when you lose everything, you realize you had the wrong things. And sometimes when you risk everything for love, you gain something far greater than any empire. They called me a mistake. Durrat whispered as they walked down the sidewalk. And you turned it into a revolution. Robert finished. Our revolution, she corrected, lacing her fingers with his. Our revolution, he agreed. And for the first time in years, the future looked infinitely more interesting than the past. 6 months later, the old converted warehouse in Boston's financial district was buzzing with activity. The sign at the entrance simply read, Blazer Analytics, transparency is our language. Durrat was in the middle of the open office, wearing, of course, a shocking pink blazer, coordinating 3 projects at once while balancing a coffee and a donut. Tommy, she shouted to the IT department, which was basically Tommy at a desk surrounded by 6 monitors. Did the data from Miami City Hall come in? It did, and it's already being processed, Tommy shouted back. By the way, you're gonna love what I found in the urban cleaning contracts. Fraud? Artistic fraud. They're charging for cleaning streets that don't even exist. Durrat laughed. Add that to the presentation. The mayor is going to have a fit. Robert appeared from what used to be a closet and now served as a meeting room. The call with the Seattle people is over. They want to hire us to audit the entire housing department. Really? Durrat stopped spinning in her chair. All of Seattle? All of Seattle. Robert smiled, still not used to the chaotic energy of the new office. 6 months ago, he was leading meetings in mahogany boardrooms. Now, he worked in a warehouse with recycled wooden desks and a coffee machine that Tommy had borrowed from an abandoned office. And in today's episode, Durrat announced to the entire office, the mistake became the CEO of an international ethical auditing firm, co-CEO. Robert corrected, tossing a paper ball at her. Co-CEO, she agreed, throwing the ball back. Sarah Chen, who had moved from Jacksonville to be communications director, looked up from her computer. Guys, did you see the news today? What news? Durrat asked, still tossing paper balls with Robert like they were teenagers. Jessica Sterling was released from prison today. The office went completely silent. The paper ball hit the floor with a pathetic little sound. What do you mean, released? Robert frowned. Deal with the prosecutor's office. She'll pay a fine and do community service. Sarah read from the screen, and apparently she gave an exclusive interview to CNN. Tommy paused the music that always played through his headphones. What kind of interview? Sarah clicked a link. The kind you're not going to like. The office's big screen lit up, showing Jessica Sterling sitting in a stylish studio, wearing a conservative beige suit, clearly chosen to project the image of a remorseful woman. The truth, Jessica was saying to the host, is that I was manipulated by people who wanted to destroy a respectable company. Durrat choked on her coffee. She's joking, right? Shh. The entire office was glued to the screen. Robert Scott was always impulsive, Jessica continued, and when this analyst showed up with her inappropriate clothes and seductive behavior, he completely lost his judgment. Seductive behavior? Durant exploded. I wore a pink blazer. She's implying, Robert said slowly, that you seduced me to get information and destroy the company. On screen, Jessica sighed dramatically. It's sad to see how some women use feminine attributes to manipulate men in positions of power. Sarah made a face. She just called you a corporate femme fatale. A femme fatale? Durant shouted. I make jokes about drawers. What kind of femme fatale makes jokes about drawers? Tommy raised his hand. Technically, a very effective one. Robert was visibly getting angry. We're going to sue her for defamation. No. Durant stood up, adjusting her blazer with determination. We're going to do something better. What? Durant smiled. That smile Robert had learned to fear and adore at the same time. We're going to respond. Live. An hour later, Durant was sitting in the CNN Boston studio, facing the same host who had interviewed Jessica. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Robert sat beside her, and Tommy had set up a presentation system that would make any tech company jealous. So, Miss Starr, the host began, how do you respond to Mrs. Sterling's accusations that you manipulated Robert Scott? Durant looked straight at the camera. Well, Bob, may I call you Bob? It's simple. Jessica Sterling is a convicted criminal trying to rewrite history. But she claims a lot of things. Durant cut him off. She even claimed that I forged documents. Remember how that ended? Bob cleared his throat, uncomfortable. But don't you think there are ethical issues in a relationship between a CEO and an employee? Of course there are. Robert leaned forward. That's why I resigned, so that we could be equals. And, Durant added, Tommy, can you show slide number 1? The screen behind them lit up, showing an impressive chart. In the 6 months since we founded Blazer Analytics, we have uncovered 18 cases of corporate fraud, recovered $42 million in diverted public funds, and helped implement transparency policies in 15 U.S. cities. Slide 2, Tommy. A new image appeared. Durant and Robert in suits and blazers, surrounded by mayors, NGO directors, and ordinary citizens, all smiling. Jessica called our work corporate destruction. Durant continued, we call it ethical cleanup. But, Bob pressed, aren't the accusations about your clothes valid? Durant looked at him as if he had just asked if the earth was flat. Bob, are you asking if wearing a pink blazer is sexual manipulation? Well, Jessica Sterling suggested. Jessica Sterling stole from the company itself, Durant laughed. If she thinks pink is a weapon of seduction, maybe that explains why she's morally bankrupt. Robert laughed, and the sound echoed through the studio. Besides, he added, any man who can be manipulated by a clothing color probably shouldn't be running a company anyway. Slide 3, Tommy. The screen showed newspaper headlines. Blazer Analytics uncovers fraud in Chicago. Corporate transparency, the new standard. The pink revolution, how one analyst changed Wall Street. The truth, Durant said, looking straight into the camera, is that some people can't accept that competence comes in all colors, including pink. And some people, Robert added, prefer to attack the messenger when they don't like the message. Bob tried one last move. But don't you think you provoked unnecessarily? Provoked what? Durant leaned forward. Honesty? Transparency? Corporate accountability. She stood, adjusting the pink blazer with pride. Bob, I've been called a mistake since day one. A mistake for wearing pink. A mistake for questioning authority. A mistake for believing competence matters more than politics. Her voice grew stronger. And do you know what I discovered? Sometimes mistakes are the only right things in the world. Robert stood beside her. Jessica Sterling represented everything wrong with American corporatism. Durant represents everything that can be right. And in today's final episode, Durant smiled at the camera. The mistake turned into a revolution, and the revolution doesn't stop. When they left the studio, Durant was radiant. How do you feel? Robert asked. Free, she answered without hesitation. For the first time in my life, completely free. Free from what? From the fear of not being enough. Robert stopped on the sidewalk and pulled her into an embrace. Durant Starr, you were never a mistake. You were always the solution. They called me a mistake. She whispered against his chest. And you turned it into an empire, he finished. Our empire, she corrected. Our empire, he agreed. And for the first time, the word forever didn't sound like a fairy tale. It sounded like a plan. 1 year later, the rooftop of the new Blazer Analytics headquarters in Boston looked more like a backyard wedding than a corporate event. LED lights hung between beams, rustic wooden tables, and a spectacular view of the city that had once rejected a girl in a pink blazer. "I can't believe you two made this work." Sarah Chen was snapping photos like the company's unofficial paparazzi. "Seriously, a year ago you were unemployed and traumatized. Now you've got a headquarters in Boston, a branch in Jacksonville, and contracts with 20 US cities. Dorot adjusted the pink blazer, because of course she was wearing pink at her own company party, and laughed. "To be fair, we had a plan." "What plan?" Tommy appeared balancing 3 plates of shrimp. "The plan was literally, let's see what happens. That's the best kind of plan." Robert walked up, wearing a navy blue suit that made his eyes shine like sapphires. "Flexible and disaster-proof." "Disaster-proof?" Sarah laughed. "You two are a walking disaster." "A very profitable disaster," Dorot corrected, toasting with champagne. "And very cute." The party was in full swing. Company employees, happy clients, friendly reporters, and even some former Scott Enterprises colleagues who had quit to join the pink revolution. "Everyone." Robert tapped a spoon against his champagne glass. "May I have your attention for a moment?" The chatter gradually faded until all eyes were on him. "1 year ago," Robert began, "I thought success meant controlling a corporate empire from the 23rd floor." Laughter from the crowd. "Today, I've discovered success means working with people you love, on projects that matter, wearing blazers in any color you like." Applause and laughter. "But mostly," Robert looked directly at Dorot, "it means finding someone who turns your mistakes into plans, your weaknesses into strengths, and your bad days into adventures." Dorot felt butterflies in her stomach. Something in his tone, the way he looked at her. "Dorot Starr." Robert knelt right there in the middle of the rooftop, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. The entire party went silent. "Will you marry me?" The world stopped. Boston stopped. Even the pigeons on the next building stopped making noise. Dorot looked at him, the man who had given up an empire for her, who worked in a converted warehouse without complaint, who laughed at her jokes about drawers, and felt her heart burst with happiness. "Are you proposing to me at a company party? It's where we met?" Robert smiled nervously. "More or less." "Actually," Dorot pretended to think seriously, "technically we met when I broke the dress code and you stared at me like I was some exotic creature." "Yes," Robert laughed, "and I still look at you that way. Because I am an exotic creature." Dorot smiled, tears beginning to form. "An exotic creature from Jacksonville who wears a pink blazer and accidentally starts corporate revolutions." "So?" Robert was still on one knee, starting to get nervous at her silence. "Is it a yes, or do I need to improve my speech?" Dorot looked around, at the friends smiling, at the company they had built together, at the Boston skyline that was now her city too. "Robert Scott," she said slowly, "are you asking me to be your business partner forever?" "Among other things." "And do you promise never to complain about my pink blazers?" "I promise to buy an entire collection if you want." "And do you promise we'll keep taking down corrupt people and causing ethical chaos wherever we go?" "I promise our honeymoon will be auditing City Hall and Vegas." The crowd laughed, but Dorot and Robert were lost in each other's eyes. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes to everything." The party exploded in cheers and applause. Robert stood and kissed her, and for one magical moment, it was as if they were the only 2 people in the world. And in the final episode, Dorot whispered against his lips when they pulled apart, "The heroine gets the guy, the company, and the happy ending. And the guy gets the most amazing girl in the world." Robert finished. At that moment, the crowd parted and a familiar figure appeared at the rooftop entrance. Jessica Sterling. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the traffic below. Jessica looked different, thinner, without that aura of poisonous superiority. Wearing a simple navy dress, no extravagant jewelry, and holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Hi," she said softly, standing at the entrance as if unsure whether to step inside. Dorot and Robert exchanged glances. "Jessica?" Robert asked cautiously. "What are you doing here?" Jessica hesitated, clearly struggling with the words. "I came to apologize. If the earlier silence had been deep, this one was bottomless." "Apologize?" Dorot repeated, incredulous. Jessica walked forward slowly, like someone approaching a dangerous animal. "The last few months in prison gave me time to think about what I did, about why I did it," She stopped a few feet away. And I realized that. She took a deep breath. I realized I was afraid. Afraid of what? Robert asked. Of being irrelevant. Jessica looked at Dorot. You represented everything I no longer was, young, talented, principled, and instead of admiring that, I tried to destroy it. Tears began to form in her eyes. Dorot, you saved a company I was stealing from. You showed integrity when I showed corruption. You deserved respect, and I gave you sabotage. The entire party was watching as if it were a reality show episode. I don't expect forgiveness, Jessica continued. But I wanted you to know that I admire what you've built. Together. She held out the bouquet to Dorot. Congratulations, truly. Dorot looked at the flowers, then at Jessica, then at Robert. Thank you, she took the bouquet. And Jessica? Yes, thank you for showing me the kind of person I never want to be, Jessica laughed, a sad but genuine sound. Fair enough. She turned to leave, but Dorot called after her. Jessica? Yes? If you really have changed, if you truly want to do things differently, there's room in the world for people who want a fresh start. Jessica smiled, the first real smile Dorot had ever seen on her. Thank you. But I think I need to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be better than someone else. She waved to the crowd. Enjoy the party. You deserve it. When Jessica disappeared down the stairs, the party slowly came back to life. Man, Tommy shook his head. And in the final episode, even the villains surrendered. Dorot laughed, holding the unexpected bouquet and the new ring. You know, she said to Robert, when I arrived in Boston a year ago, I thought I was going to conquer the corporate world. And you did. No. She shook her head. I changed the corporate world. That's different. Robert pulled her closer. How so? Conquering is about power. Changing is about purpose. Dorot looked around the party, at all the people who had joined the Pink Revolution. They called me a mistake. And you turned it into a revolution, Robert finished as always. Our revolution, she corrected, kissing him again. Forever, he whispered. Forever, she agreed. And as Boston sparkled around them, two people who had found love in the middle of corporate chaos danced under the stars, knowing that some love stories begin with pink blazers and end with forever. Because sometimes, the happy ending is just the beginning of the real adventure. And so ends the journey of Dorot Starr, the girl from Jacksonville, who dared to wear a pink blazer in a gray corporate world and ended up transforming not only her own life, but also redefining what success, integrity, and true love really mean. From an underestimated analyst who made hilarious typing errors to co-CEO of a groundbreaking company, Dorot proved that sometimes being different is not a flaw, it's a superpower. Robert learned that giving up an empire can be the way to build something far more valuable. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and of course, plenty of laughter about stuck drawers. And even Jessica Sterling discovered that it's never too late to choose to be a better person. They called me a mistake, and I turned it into a plan. This phrase became much more than a personal mantra. It turned into the motto of a generation of professionals who refuse to accept that being authentic is a problem to be fixed. What did you think of Dorot and Robert's journey? What was your favorite moment in this story of love and corporate revolution? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story? Did you connect with Dorot's courage? Were you rooting for Robert to find true love? Or maybe you have your own experience with ridiculous corporate dress codes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to receive more moving stories like this one. See you next time. And remember, if someone says you're a mistake, maybe it's only because you're the solution they can't see yet.